Thank you very much. Okay. So Thessaloniki is quite a well-known case study of Holocaust extermination. So it's anything but understudied in Greek and international Holocaust historiography. But at the same time, I think one might argue that there are many things that we still lack an understanding of. So my paper today will start with this methodological dimension on what we can still learn from this story. And then it will move to, let's say, social history narrative about the Holocaust in the city. From, again, as promised, what I think is a way of a bottom-up approach. So as already mentioned, the extermination of about 50,000 Jews in Thessaloniki in 1943 has garnered significant attention. Mark Mazauer, probably one of the most famous historians of European history, we're lucky that he likes writing about Greece so much, in my opinion, has recently argued that despite the significant merits and progress of the last 15 years, time has come to broaden the perspective of historical analysis and move to the next phase, that of a more all-inclusive narrative that will conceptualize and explain the Holocaust in its entirety about Thessaloniki. He made his case having in mind an introvert narrative of the last 10 years that focused on the Jewish community of the city as an isolated island, more or less. So this discussion often sees the community as the sole or most important agent and accepts certain internalized narrative patterns as granted. Mazauer thinks that this discussion has developed its own set of internal subplots that can be hardly explained if someone fails to see the bigger picture of European, for example, colonialist culture, and not, of course, national politics, and of course, the point of view of other significant actors as the Christian population administration. Another important scholar of Thessaloniki, Devinar, on similar tones, claims that the whole interwar social history of the Jewish community is written in a misleading way. A retrospective reading of the period as the period before the destruction that ends up being written as a historiography of tears and lament. So his suggestion is simple: to attempt to break the tie between the Holocaust and what preceded. So Nar looks for a new social history of the Jewish Salonika, and the way to achieve this for him is a deep dive into formerly unknown or unread sources. Today, from my own perspective, I would like to contribute to this discussion and push the envelope a little bit further and claim that historiography has also failed almost entirely on a single but extremely crucial level of analysis of the Holocaust, that of the microhistory and bottom-up approaches. And my claim is twofold. I'm glad that you're sitting next to me because you have developed this genre into a very, very meaningful ways. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll have the pleasure of having Odette in Thessaloniki to talk about the family history and what it means to Holocaust historiography, practically. So existing historiography has taken microhistory at face value, more or less, as the sum of individual stories and trajectories. There is nothing wrong with that. Documenting the life of victims is itself very, very important. However, it often has not even attempted to ask interpretive and analytical questions. One question that I will deal with today is about survival or extermination, and what can explain it possibly, if anything. What can we learn from the stories of survivors that will deepen our understanding of the poetics of deportation, let's put it this way. So a privilege that Holocaust researchers have, I guess in comparison to scholars of Armenian genocide, is that we have a very deep knowledge of names of victims and survivors. I don't know if 1.5 million victims is an acceptable number for Armenia. I don't know how many names you actually have in this case. Probably nobody knows because but the Holocaust has a long tradition into documenting names and lives of victims. And that's a great privilege, I think, for us, the historians. And for Thessaloniki is very important because this look to microhistorical approaches can give us a lot of information about the 4% that survived. And about half of it, the 2%, only managed to get out of Auschwitz alive. That means, however, that those who never deported to Auschwitz are a very, very small minority within the Jewish community life. So who were those people? This is the question that I dare to ask. And another point that where is Tal? Tal, I would make Tal very angry right now if he was here, and I'm glad he's not here. So I think that moving from, let's say, mere description to thick description requires tools and theories outside history. This is my opinion. Some of you might know that political science, for example, was for decades avoiding studying and discussing the Holocaust. This is no longer the case, by the way. And my opinion is that, well, we don't have a choice, but we should welcome also such macro sociological political science perspective if we want to move the discussion further. Of course, more or less, this is what probably Twitter shareholders thought of when they allowed the buyout from Elon Musk, and we know how this worked out. But let's hope that the results will be different in our field. So, what could possibly someone learn from social science about the Holocaust? I think the first, for us historians, is the first point is we can have a hard reality check for our theories. Our lack of effort into comparative methods. This workshop, this is one of the reasons that is very important and interesting, that places comparative history into the forefront. And this is so rare practically in historical approaches. So this lack of effort, yes, exactly. I think it's exposed by the merits of this approach in social science. Also, the defiance of political science, of the historical details, or even the morality of historians, sometimes can be refreshing, despite I still think that our heavy ethical preconditions and do's and don'ts of the Holocaust study are still important and relevant. So those of you who might follow the discussion in Germany about the Catechism of Holocaust Memory might know what I mean by this reference. So, what else can we learn? We can learn how to frame our own research questions and to look for responses on issues of wider scope. And of course, use tools and methods that we should be more open with and more eclectic with at the same time. Last point, and then I move to my case study. My example of this, what I discussed already, the analytical tools of social science about the social network theories. I think they can be very, very crucial and the key concept into Holocaust studies. Social network theory can provide a framework for not only describing, but also interpreting issues of intercommunal and bicommunal relations, and allows to talk about concepts as class. And I very much appreciated in the introduction this reference to social class and how the genocide didn't really distinguish between poor and rich. And this is a topic to be discussed also in the Holocaust, in my opinion. So class, gender, spatial relations in an individual and collective way. So social networks and relevant concepts as social capital have direct implications for the study of survival, both inside and outside the camps. And this is what I plan to discuss today. So just very briefly to refer to, I don't know, okay, here. This is, let's say, the research question. If individual survival in the case of Thessaloniki is random, and if not, what might explain it? Of course, this is not the end of the journey, just asking the questions to start the journey. This is how I see it. I don't have time to go through the theory of social capital and networks, but I think it provides the perfect, let's say, background for interpreting and understanding individual agency during the deportations in Thessaloniki. And here's the first example of why I'm making this a central point in my analysis. This is the first event that really shook the life of Jewish Thessaloniki. Is the so-called Great Fire 1917 that burned down entirely the city center. And in this city center, about 40 to 50,000 Jews lived. And then they practically weren't allowed to rebuild their houses and their shops, because it was too expensive to do so. And it was too expensive to do so, not by coincidence, but by design. So those people practically became refugees within their own city and lived in the outskirts of the city into self-made and self-preserved, newly established neighborhoods. That means that the social ties and the social life of this population, 2/3 practically of the Jewish population of the city, was entirely destroyed already from 1917. So in many ways, things that appear again during the deportation period have been established in this very important date and this very important event, because social and economic life was disrupted so violently that never managed to reestablish itself in its, let's say, normal values, not even after 25 to 30 years that the deportation started. So that's my first point. Here's a look of the destruction of the city center. That's the result. Illustrations of this huge disaster that hit Jewish Thessalonica in 1917. And of course, then 5 years after, a similar event took place by the arrival of Asia Minor and Pontic refugees in the city and reoccupying of space that previously didn't belong to anyone, belonged to the Muslims of the city, or was redesigned to accommodate them. So that also created a lot of social tension between the Jews and the Asia Minor refugees from bottom up, but also from top down policies of the Greek state. This is a long and interesting story. But again, the point I want to make about this story is how it contributed to social distancing between the inter-ethnic and inter-religious communities of the city. So this is what I really want to stress from this presentation. And here's a map of Thessaloniki. You can see that those 5 areas are not in the city center, with the exception of this one, the green one, which was the Jewish ghetto during the deportations. And I'll get back to this area later on, because the photo Tal wanted to show, it's within this area. And this is how it looked like Jewish life practically after 1917. And it was a very, very complicated way to try to maintain a social and economic status within the city's life the way things used to be. So moving quickly, I'm really scared of that. Famine, first signs of social destruction. It hits mostly and primarily the Jewish community. Black Sabbath, that some of the pictures I talked about, I had no time to talk them about in details, but we know that there are witnesses around in this very important moment of public humiliation of the Jewish community. So I'm linking here a little bit with Tal's point. Again, same event, very, very important. It signified an upgrade to what the Nazis did against the Jewish community of the city. Again, more pictures. And if we have the time, we would discuss about uniforms and see about people who didn't have any involvement in this picture, but they're there. Then forced labor, all those are, let's say, steps into making the Jewish community weaker and not powerful enough or willing enough to resist the deportations. And then ransom to avoid the forced labor, which means looting the cash the Jewish community had entirely. And then the Jewish cemetery destruction, a pivotal moment that signified the huge differences between the Jewish and the Christian community of the city, because this Jewish cemetery destruction is orchestrated and implemented by the Christian administration authorities. And it's quite popular to the extent we know decision at that time. Here's how it looked. And this is an interwar article that proves the point I want to make. The rector of my university protests that the Jewish community hasn't decided to remove its cemetery. Here's my university. This building still is in the heart of my university's life and surrounded by Jewish tombstones. And here's how the same building looks after. And here's what happened. We still trace parts of those tombstones all over the city's life, and even 200, 300 kilometers away from the city's, let's say, center, which means that so many people benefited from it and reused it as construction material, including churches, the Red Cross, local municipality, National Theater, and just families who wanted some construction material. And here is the aftermath of this story, a picture of how a group of young students visits this area and finds skulls and bones in this area. We all know where they belonged, and they play the new Hamlets, though. And this is, I think, that's a very, very interesting picture as well. So I'm not going through the technical details of the deportations, because I want to make sure that we all are on the same page in terms of what this social distance between Christians and Jews meant for the deportations. As the propagandistic paper of the Nazis said at that time, it's payback time against the Jewish community. So this is how it started, and it was completed after a few months, 19 transportations to Auschwitz in total. And just before they left, the declaration of properties. Nice example of how the locals benefited from the looting of properties. That's the official way, is they asked to receive Jewish shops, and by proving that they were pro-German and pro-Nazi. That was a very common process for specific shops also, because they liked specific shops and they appreciate it. And here is not a very pleasant document. It belongs to the Archbishop, the Metropolitan of the city. It's 2 days after the first deportation, and one might think that he could have, let's say, tried to oppose the first deportation and protest about it, but no, he writes to ask for a specific gentleman that he likes and approves and protects to receive a nice Jewish shop, and he sends a recommendation letter for the looting to be successful. And he's a righteous of the nations, by the way, this metropolitan. And then those are newspaper advertisements that advertise that those shops now operate under new administration. We can imagine which was the old one. And now I'll switch into, let's say, institutions that try to show some social proximity and friendship to the Jewish suffering, the resistance. It's such a long discussion, and Odette practically opened it with an article that I still appreciate a lot for what it contributed. And it's a long story. I will not have the time to discuss it, but resistance is definitely one of the institutions that contributed into rescuing Jews. The same Metropolitan issued a protest later on. It's the only known one. It's a direct one, though. And this is the local lawyers association. Is the only professional association that protested the deportations. Now, I don't know how much time I have. 5 minutes, okay. So very quickly, what I want to connect with my theory. No, 10, okay. So let's see. Again, my point, social trust, the collapse of social trust, I think during the interwar period, because of what I already mentioned, I think it played a role into the very high level of extermination rates in Thessaloniki. And so social distance was already predominant in intercommunal relations, even before the deportations and during the deportations. And now, this is the bottom-up part, by providing results from, let's say, the data in the archives, studying educational institutions and other ways of life. So, two institutions are very important and interesting in Thessaloniki, the Music State Conservatory and the Aristotle University, that are both built and operational and state-funded because they're used as vehicles of social engineering, practically, of modernization, Europeanization, Hellenization, and assimilation of the interethnic communities of the city. And this is, by the way, the same politics implemented or attempted to be implemented in Greek-occupied Smyrna. So it's kind of a colonial way of trying to play a little bit with the city's demographics and other dimensions, also urban life and designing, and of course, education. Why those institutions are important, I'll show you. So about 800 Jewish students participate on those two institutions. And this is a project that we implemented together with FA. We're very grateful and proud for this. We've messed up into dissemination, but we'll fix it. It's an interactive map of student life during the deportations, spread within the city's life schools. And we have found the school archives with the help of my wonderful students. And this is how it looks like, a personal, let's say, card for each student, whether they survived or not, where they were born, at which year they studied, etc., etc. So what we do is we try to figure out what its data the archive gives us in order to understand what this person's, let's say, socioeconomic profile was. At that time, and even today, where you lived, it was an important indication of, let's say, social class or wealth or whatever. So having the address, living address, is very important to understand what kind of, in what, let's say, social hierarchy such a person lives. And of course, knowing the profession of the individuals or the parents of the individuals is also important. We're constantly working on the methodology. I don't have time now to talk about the problems, but there are many problems, trust me. And then we control this data with the overall data the Jewish community has, which is thousands of names and peoples. About 35,000 people have been confirmed as victims or survivors, and we control with those groups. So these are the results. This is how it looks, the class distribution of the Jewish community. Near to 0 is very poor, near to 5 is very rich. You can see how it goes. And here how it looks on the left is the whole of the community. On the right is the music school Jewish students. So you can see there is a class difference, obvious one, right? Those who study music are middle to upper class. And that's important too. And here's the probability of survival if someone never attended the music school. So the whole city except those students. And this is according to social class distribution. So 1 is the probability of survival if you were very poor. 5 is the probability of survival if you were very rich. And you can see that the, let's say, very rich to middle class have similar chances of survival, which is very interesting. I can explain why later on. And here is the comparison with music school participants. You can see how much higher it is, the probability of survival, if you just went to state conservatory and learned some instrument, which is shocking to a great extent. And this is how it looks on the 3 institutions that I study, the music conservatory, comparing the yellow, the very narrow, thin line is the general population, the university students, and the schools, private and mixed schools versus exclusively Jewish schools. And here's how it looks like. And I'm not saying this is everything, but I'm saying that those are good enough findings to maybe look further into this relation. 2 minutes. Do you have 2 minutes? Thank you so much. You're so generous. So some examples of networks, of social networks and of survival. The Music Conservatory Network. There are some legends in this network because some of those people ended up in Auschwitz playing in the orchestra, both women and men from Thessaloniki. Menasseh, Asael, Strumstad, etc., very, very important people who also protected within the orchestra other members of the Jewish community of Thessaloniki by giving them access to this network. And this is how they were connected. They were all connected to each other, which proves how strong this network was. A second type of network, the university network. This young lady there, she was very pretty, and the Christian student of law was in love with her. So he insisted to move her to Athens through his resistance networks. She had a close friend that he also rescued, and then he returned and rescued both their families. So one single person who was, I wouldn't say madly, but probably very much in love with her, rescued those 9 individuals. And we know the name, and that also is a very good example of a strong interpersonal network of youth. Third network, the resistance per se, 2 brothers against university students, both. The older one on the right survives because he's a member of the resistance. The left one does not survive because he was not a member of the resistance. I don't know if it was for that, but this is what we know. I know I will disobey. I will make a quick comment on the current situation. This in Greek says a list of kidnapped. Kidnapped is the term of the people who vanished in the camps. Tal has written about it, about what it means at the early years, how Jewish victims are being categorized. And this is the picture that Tal promised, but I deliver. And I think this is a fantastic picture. If I have one moment and we can talk for quite a few minutes about it, what you see is the roundups and the walk to the train station to be prepared for the final deportation. And what we actually see is what social distance and social proximity looks at the same time in the same picture. Because you see 2 lines of people, one is moving on the right, and this is the deportees. And they're being guarded by Greek gendarmerie officers and men, but also German officers. And then you see a second line standing and watching. So I always ask my students, because I show this picture, what they think, why those people are there. And then there are other people who are behind. And I will not tell you what they say, but it's mostly negative. And here I make a reference to Claude Latsman's Shoah. The Corfu chapter has a very strong reference of the local Jewish president of the community about the Christians watching the spectacle of the roundup. And he says they came to see the cinema, the spectacle. This is how he frames it. So it's a very negative response. And here that reminds that situation. And my students don't know Shoah Lanzmann, but they know about Thessaloniki and how the tension was obvious. So they're always very negative about it. But we do have we have testimonies of people who were in this line. And those were people who wanted to say last goodbye, show their solidarity and their support. We don't know about everybody, but what we know of, and you can see that they're there and they're dedicated, because if you wanted to have fun or maybe be curious about it, you could be behind. You can see so many people that don't even care. They just walk. Someone walks to the other direction, and you can see 2 people on the balcony in the left frame that watch the spectacle or whatever. And of course, there's a photographer, which we know nothing about. So I don't have time to discuss about it, but I think it symbolizes what I wanted to make, that both at the same time, social distance is very crucial in Thessaloniki, and how the structural damages in the city's pre-national life were implemented during the Greek administration, I think contributed to the way the deportations took place in the city. So that's all. I hope I didn't mess up with time.